Welcome to True Tears Stories. Please like this video and subscribe to True Tears Stories. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The hospital room was too quiet. Alan never noticed how loud silence could be until now, how it buzzed against the walls like something trying to escape. The machines had been beeping all morning, a slow rhythm of numbers and warnings and synthetic reassurance. But now, with the ventilator paused, the last mechanical breath exhaled, the room seemed to hold its breath with him. He stood at the side of the bed, hand wrapped around hers. It felt cold, but not lifeless, just suspended. Her skin was still soft, her fingers curved slightly like they could close again if she just had the will. "Emily," he whispered. Her name felt like paper in his mouth, thin and too easy to tear. The nurse had said it might take a few minutes, or an hour, or longer. "Everyone's different," she'd added gently, like that helped, like that made any of this feel normal. Alan looked down at his wife. Her face was peaceful, framed by the soft tangle of hair that still curled slightly around her ears, even after the weeks in bed. They'd brushed it every day, the nurses, said it helped, even when someone wasn't aware. Alan did it once himself. Just once. He'd lasted about 3 strokes before the comb shook too hard in his hand, and he had to stop. "I'm here," he said, though he knew it didn't matter. He had signed the papers that morning, not with a trembling hand, not with a dramatic pause, just a pen, a click, a scribble, like any other form, like signing for a package. But this package was everything he loved, everything he'd built his life around. 22 years, a daughter in college, plans for a garden she never started, arguments over thermostat settings and which show to binge next, all of it ending with a click and a scribble. The doctor had called it non-responsive wakefulness. Alan hated that phrase. It made her sound like a machine on standby, not a person, not the woman who once laughed so hard at a movie she spilled wine on the couch and didn't care. She had always cared too much, about everything, which is why it felt wrong to make this decision for her. But she'd made it clear, years ago, during a dinner they both forgot how they got into. "Don't let me live like a vegetable," she'd said between bites of roasted chicken. "If I can't talk to you, Alan, if I can't be me, pull the plug." She'd said it half joking, but her eyes were serious. And now, here they were. Plug pulled. He wasn't sure what to do next, what to expect. Would she gasp? Would something happen that made it clear the moment had come? Nothing did. Just that soft, eerie stillness. He rubbed her hand with his thumb. "You know," he said, voice low, "I thought I'd be more angry, that this would feel like a betrayal. But it doesn't. It just feels hollow." A nurse stepped in briefly, checked a chart, gave a kind smile, then left again. Alan appreciated that. No hovering, no forced reassurances, just quiet competence. He checked the monitor. Heart rate 48 BPM. Blood pressure faint but steady. The numbers didn't mean much anymore. They were echoes, like her presence. Something measurable that no longer held weight. He glanced at the clock. 3:47 p.m. They said it was okay to sit, to take breaks. He didn't want to. He didn't want to leave her side in case He didn't even know what, as if he might miss something. He stood, watched. Then something happened. A flicker. Not in the lights, not in the room, on the monitor. A sudden spike. Just one. The heart rate jumped. 48, 49, 53, 61. Alan blinked. A nurse re-entered, alarmed by the sudden change in rhythm. Her eyes darted to the monitor, then to Emily. "What's going on?" Alan asked, but his voice sounded strange, detached. The nurse pressed a button, summoned someone. Another nurse arrived, then a doctor. "Could be artifact," someone murmured. "Could be spontaneous recovery. Rare, but not impossible." Alan's ears were ringing. He looked at Emily. Her eyelids fluttered, just slightly. So slight, he almost thought he imagined it. But then they moved again. The room snapped to attention. Voices, movements. The calm evaporated into a buzz of activity. A cold stethoscope. A flashlight in the eyes. Words like recheck and reflex and oxygenation. Alan didn't move. Couldn't. He just kept staring. Her hand was still in his. But now, it gripped back. Slight. Weak. But real. He didn't let go. Alan felt her fingers twitch. First a tremble, then a slow, unmistakable flex. He looked up, expecting someone to confirm what he already knew, to say, "Yes, we saw it too." But everyone was busy, eyes on charts and monitors, pressing buttons, calling out readings. So he stayed where he was, clutching her hand, afraid that if he moved, if he blinked too long, it might stop. "Her pulse is climbing," one of the nurses said, barely hiding the disbelief. "Respiration's shallow, but present. She's trying to breathe on her own." Alan stared down at his wife, as if the force of his attention might help. "Emily," he whispered again, "I'm right here." And then her eyelids fluttered once more. "Try to squeeze if you can hear me," the nurse said softly, leaning close. Alan waited, breath caught in his chest. Emily's fingers moved again. This time, more clearly. A faint but purposeful squeeze. Alan's heart hammered in response. "I felt it," he said, his voice cracking. "She's here." The doctor stepped closer, more measured, more guarded. "We need to do a full neuroeval. This doesn't necessarily mean full consciousness, but it's a response." Alan nodded, though the words barely registered. All he could think was, "She's still here," against everything they told him, against every scan and consultation and document. Something in her had refused to go. They moved swiftly after that. A portable EEG was wheeled in. Wires attached. Nurses took turns with whispered commands. Alan watched from the corner, not wanting to interfere, not wanting to look away either. When they finished, the doctor returned to Alan, face cautious, but not closed. "She's showing limited cortical activity. Very faint, but it's there. This is highly unusual." Alan didn't know what to say. He simply asked, "What do we do now?" "We monitor," the doctor said, "and hope." Hope. It was such a thin word, and yet it felt like a lighthouse beam in a long, dark sea. Alan sat back in the chair, Emily's hand still cradled in his. The hospital lights cast a yellow sheen over her face, and in it, he could almost pretend she was just sleeping. Almost. Later that night, After the initial chaos settled and the staff left them alone for a bit, Alan pulled his chair closer and leaned in. Her breathing was soft, labored, but hers. "You scared me," he said gently, trying to smile. "You really did." Her hand didn't move again. Her eyes didn't open, but the room didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt alive, tense, uncertain, but alive. Alan thought back to the day the accident happened. Just a fender bender, they said. Low speed, but the impact had been just enough. The angle just wrong. A blood clot, then swelling, emergency surgery, then the coma, and then this. Weeks had passed. He'd stopped counting after the third. People sent meals. Friends called less frequently. Ella came when she could. But college didn't pause for grief. And Alan had sat at that bedside more days than not, waiting for a miracle he didn't really believe would come. Now, it had. Or maybe not a miracle. Maybe just a flicker. But even flickers could start fires. He stayed overnight, though the nurses offered to set up a cot in the waiting area. He didn't want to leave her side. He propped himself up with the thin hospital pillow, her hand never far from reach. Every hour, he'd wake and glance at the monitors, just to make sure. In the dim light, he whispered old memories aloud to her, the way she used to hum while brushing her teeth. The time she burned an entire pan of brownies because she was dancing to ABBA. The weekend they got stuck in the rain, soaked and laughing, huddled under a broken umbrella. "I never said thank you enough," he said at one point, "for holding everything together, for being the glue." No response. But it didn't matter. He'd say it anyway. In the morning, the neurologist returned. "We'll run another scan," she said. "There's a chance this was a reflexive episode, but honestly, I've never seen a case quite like this. If this is awareness returning, it's fragile. It'll need time." Alan nodded. "She has time." They ran the scan. More whispers. More nods. "She's not out of the woods," the neurologist told him gently. "But the woods aren't as dark as we thought." Alan stayed another night. And another. And on the third morning, when he said her name again, her eyes opened. Just for a second. But it was enough. The second time her eyes opened, they stayed open. Not long, just a few blinks, a minute or two of shifting awareness. But it was enough for Alan to see something behind them. Recognition. Confusion. A flicker of return. "Emily," he whispered, leaning closer, afraid that any louder and the moment might vanish. "Can you hear me?" Her lips parted, dry and pale. Her head didn't move, but her eyes, those eyes he knew better than his own reflection, found his. And then a sound escaped her throat. Hoarse, barely a syllable, but it was his name. It had to be. Alan nearly collapsed. The nurse at the monitor gasped, eyes darting to the screen. "She's trying to speak. I'll notify the doctor." But Alan didn't look away. He held Emily's gaze, gently brushing a strand of hair back from her forehead. "You're here," he said, voice cracking. "You came back." A single tear slipped down her cheek. The medical team returned quickly, efficient and quiet, as though afraid to spook a fragile thing awake. Tests followed. Commands whispered, squeezes, blinks, eye tracking. The neurologist, Dr. Sharma, took careful notes. "She's responsive, minimally, but it's a positive sign," she told Alan outside the room later. "We don't know yet what her recovery might look like, But this is real. It's happening. Alan had no words, only gratitude thick in his throat. For the next few days, the hospital room changed. Visitors returned. Friends, hesitant but hopeful, stopped by and left flowers in her favorite shades of yellow. Ella came down from college, face wide-eyed and trembling when she saw her mother awake. "Mom," she said, barely a whisper, "I thought you were gone." Emily couldn't speak much yet, but her hand lifted, reached for her daughter's face, touched her cheek with a gentleness Alan hadn't seen since the day Ella was born, and something in that small gesture broke all three of them open. Ella cried openly, unashamed. Alan held them both, and for a moment, the hospital room didn't feel like a place of endings anymore. It felt like the first day of something unnamed. In the quieter hours, when it was just the two of them again, Alan talked. About the bills she didn't need to worry about, the neighbors asking after her, the way he burned spaghetti the second week she was gone. He told her things he had never said. "You know, I kept asking myself if I should have noticed, if I should have said more earlier. The signs were there, I think. The fatigue, the little forgetfulness, but I kept brushing it off. You always took care of everyone. I guess I thought you'd always bounce back." She squeezed his hand. He leaned closer. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Em, but I'll spend every day earning it." Her lips twitched in something close to a smile. Progress came slowly. Speech remained just out of reach, but her eyes were alert more often, her grip stronger, her presence unmistakable. And the guilt Alan had buried deep, about the decisions he'd almost made, the life support conversations, the moment he signed the DNR paperwork, rose to the surface. One night, when the room was quiet and she was sleeping again, he pulled the folded form from his coat pocket, the one the hospital had given him to sign before they'd started the withdrawal process. Before everything changed, he stared at the signature. His own name, written so neatly, looked foreign now. He had let go, at least in paperwork. He had signed her away because the doctors said it was time. And still, she had come back. That thought haunted him. When the neurologist came in the next morning, he asked the question aloud. "Did I give up on her too soon?" Dr. Sharma paused, thoughtful. "No. You made the best decision with the information you had. No one expected this. But she fought anyway." "She did," the doctor said, "which tells me she had something powerful worth fighting for." Alan looked back at Emily, sleeping now, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm steadier than days past. He knew what she had fought for. And it wasn't life at all costs. It was love. It was a family that still needed her. It was one more story with Ella. One more walk through their favorite park. One more sunrise shared over coffee and silence. And he would give her every piece of that, for as long as time allowed. The first morning she came home, nothing felt real. Alan had scrubbed the house top to bottom the night before. He washed the windows she always said were too streaky, refolded the blankets in the living room just the way she liked them, and fluffed the pillows on their bed 3 times until they sat just right. He stood at the kitchen counter now, waiting for the car from the rehab center, clutching a chipped mug of tea, her favorite kind, the one that smelled faintly of orange peel and cloves. Emily wasn't the same. Not completely. Her speech came in whispers, and sometimes her hands trembled without reason. She still used a wheelchair for longer distances, and every movement seemed like it came with a second of hesitation. But she was here, alive, breathing, home. When the car pulled up, Alan stepped outside, heart pounding. He opened the door, thanked the nurse, and knelt beside the passenger seat. "Hi," he said, smiling. Her face lit up, soft, tired, but real. Her lips moved slowly. "Hi." He didn't cry. He thought he might. But instead, a warmth flooded him, spreading down to his fingertips as he helped her out and into the wheelchair. Inside the house, she paused in the doorway, her eyes roaming. She looked like someone rediscovering a familiar dream. "I changed the curtains," he said sheepishly. "You always hated the old ones." She chuckled, weak but genuine. "Better?" They settled into a quiet rhythm over the next week. Mornings were for physical therapy. Evenings were for tea and old movies. Ella stayed through the first weekend, setting up a laptop at the dining table and working remotely, making Emily laugh with her dramatic readings of emails. Alan found himself learning again. How to listen better, how to wait for her words without rushing them, how to sit in silence with her and still feel completely understood. One night, as they watched the rain tap against the windows, Emily reached out and took his hand. Her grip was steadier than it had been. "I remember," she said. He turned. "What do you remember?" "The monitor, the moment. After the machines went quiet." He swallowed. "You were still in there." "I was." Her voice was thin but clear. Everything felt far away, like I was under ice. "But I heard you. I heard you say goodbye." Alan stared at her, breath caught. "And then I heard you cry," she added. "I couldn't leave you like that." His throat closed. All the words he had rehearsed about regret, about fear, about second chances, they slipped from his mind. "I thought I'd lost you," he managed. "You almost did. But you stayed." Emily nodded slowly. "I think I came back for us." They didn't speak for a while after that. There was no need. The air between them no longer felt heavy with what was unsaid. It simply existed, warm and full. Later, as Alan tucked her into bed and turned off the lights, she said one more thing. "Thank you for choosing to stay, even when you thought I couldn't." He sat on the edge of the mattress. "I didn't stay out of obligation, Em. I know. I stayed because you're still the only home I've ever known." The silence that followed didn't carry weight anymore. It carried peace. Months passed. Slowly, steadily, life reshaped itself. Emily walked again, with help. Her voice returned in full sentences, then in laughter. She helped cook one night, even if all she managed was stirring soup and bossing Alan about the salt. They visited the hospital once, together, to thank the staff. One nurse cried when she saw Emily, the same nurse who had once turned off the machines. That night, back home, Alan took the papers from the drawer, the DNR forms, the living will, and they burned them together in the fireplace. Not because they didn't matter, but because they no longer defined the story. Their story was this: life tried to slip away, but love asked it to stay, and somehow, impossibly, it did. Some endings aren't clean lines. They're soft edges, blended between what was lost and what was found. For Alan, What followed Emily's return wasn't a perfect life. It was a real one. There were still pills to track, doctors to call, days when her hands shook so badly she couldn't lift a fork. There were nights when the memory of machines and beeping monitors haunted his sleep. But beneath it all, something deeper had taken root, a kind of gratitude that couldn't be shaken. Every morning he made her tea. Every night he turned her favorite quilt down, just a little more neatly than before. And every time she caught him looking at her for too long, she'd say, "Still here," with a smile that warmed every room. And she was. Ella visited more often. They planted herbs together in old clay pots. Basil, rosemary, mint. It wasn't much, but it grew. One afternoon, Emily stood in the doorway watching Alan try to fix the squeaky back gate, and she said softly, "You've always loved me in the quiet." That's what this new chapter was. Not a return to what had been, but a rebirth of what could still be. Love not shouted or dramatic, but quiet, enduring, and real. And as for Alan, he no longer feared the silence, because in that silence, he had found the heartbeat he thought he'd lost. A monitor had once flatlined, but love had kept pulsing. They say some people come back from the brink, but sometimes it's not just the body that returns. Sometimes it's the truth of a bond that never left. And sometimes, miraculously, quietly, that's enough to change everything.